Good day, everyone. My name is Angelia J. Gutierrez, and I'm from Section B. I'll be reporting on the pitfalls to avoid in layouting from Module 5. But first, let me give you a bit of an introduction. So, we now know that having well-written text alone doesn't guarantee effective communication or understanding among readers. So in the previous section, we discussed what to do in layouting a publication. We now know the do's, and now we're going to discuss the don'ts. So now I'll be discussing what not to do and how to avoid pitfalls in layouting for newspapers and other media. So the first problem we have, a common problem that some newspapers or printed articles or printed materials have is grayness of page. So this typically happens when you have too many blocks of text, which creates a dizzying and unappealing layout. So the best way to avoid this is to shorten your text and use white spaces effectively. So when you're emphasizing key points, it's best to use bold and italic styles. And it also helps the reader to use numbers or bullets when presenting a long list. So here's an example of this. So this is just an example of a very chunky paragraph. So as you can see, it's barely readable. It's more than 10 lines, and it might be difficult for the reader to digest this. So why does it matter? So this is called creating a wall of text, basically. So creating a wall of text can make your materials impossible to read or digest by the average person or the average reader. So this is a common mistake that does not only apply to newspapers, but with blogs, online articles, and even research papers. It can be a mistake also done by students as well. So longer text does not always mean that it is better. So remember, it is better to break up your paragraphs in clear and easy to digest and shorter sections. And the second pitfall is tombstoning. So this happens when you place two similar headlines side by side, like a tombstone in a cemetery. So your reader might read headlines of two totally different stories continuously by mistake. So they could potentially read two different headlines as one or two different articles as one. So the best way to avoid this is to use different type sizes or typefaces and putting photos or borders around your stories. So here's an example of this. I know that this is two separate pages, but when you open up the newspaper like that, the reader might accidentally read the two headlines as one. So the first article here, as you can see, it's supposed to be a positive story or an uplifting story, and the second one is an eye-catching an attention grabbing headline that has a negative connotation here. So as you can see, it has the same font, it has the same size, and your reader might read it as one headline, which is really not supposed to be the case here. So the third problem is called armpitting. So this happens when you place a smaller or narrower headline under a larger headline. So this could potentially create the impression that the subordinate story or the smaller headline story is related to the bigger story or the main headline in the same page. So a good way to avoid this is to run at least 8 lines of text between the heads to avoid the so-called armpitting. So this is an example. So as you can see, here we have two main headlines, like a happy accident, and then you have a smaller story on the side, man shot dead in Henderson County. So it might imply that so the happy accident is this tragic murder here. So it shouldn't look that way, basically. And also the hunt for Britain's cruelest criminal. And then on the side you have what seems to be a photo of the late Queen Elizabeth, and in a smaller headline it says she's marking her 63rd anniversary of her accession. So this could really confuse the readers, or um, even perpetuate fake news or fake understanding of the news. So why does it matter? So tombstoning and armpitting, as similar as they are, they can potentially mislead readers by creating false connections between unrelated stories that distort the reader's understanding. So this can affect how the audience interprets the news, leading to misconceptions about events or issues. So Avoiding to avoiding tombstoning and armpitting helps maintain clarity and integrity in reporting, which ensures that each story is presented with the proper context and significance. So what matters here is that each story has proper context and that um there's no nothing will be misconstrued here. So the fourth pitfall that we have is called the Dutch wrap. So this happens when the story is separated from the headline. So this commonly happens in newspapers, thick newspapers, I suppose. So it can make it hard for the reader to find the connection when the text is not in order, when your headline is totally separate from the story itself. So it is best to lay out each headline and story as one complete unit. So let's imagine that the headline on at the very top about the late One Direction member is totally separate from the actual story, and let's assume that the story is in another page. So when that happens, when the headline itself and the text isn't connected in the same page, that's called the Dutch wrap. So yeah. Um, the next pitfall that we have is unlabeled or missing jumps. So this is quite an important one. So this happens when the reader cannot find the continuation of an article. So it often happens when the writer forgets to indicate where the story's continuation is located. So an issue like this commonly happens when newspapers or magazines are hurriedly published. So the best way to avoid this is to really review all of the stories before printing and labeling each jump correctly. Okay. So an example of this is here. Here we can clearly see that this story, this headline is continued on page 7. So without the presence of this continuation label, that would be a really great error because the reader wouldn't know that the story isn't actually complete yet. Okay. And the next pitfall we have is called backward jumps. So this happens when the continuation of a story is uh printed on a previous page. So um this is even more disorganized when it's when your story is not in sequence. So for the best readability, stories should continue in the succeeding pages instead of making the readers go back from the pages to find a specific continuation. And the last pitfall that we have here is dominant positions of jumps. So this happens when the continuation label of a story occupies the upper portion of the page. So it must be noted that jumps should occupy the subordinate positions on a jump page. So here's an example of this. It mostly happens when the continuation label is at the very top instead of at the bottom of the text. So why do these matter? So the presence and positioning of jump lines can either make your reader want to continue the story or frustrate them even more when your story is not labeled properly. So every story must always be reviewed for its order and jump labels before publishing your newspaper or communication materials. So, in conclusion, whether you're working on newspapers, pamphlets, magazines, or online articles, being aware of these pitfalls can help you avoid confusing your readers and publishing errors. So, remember that even the best copy loses its impact if the presentation is disorganized and confusing. And so that's the end of my presentation, and thank you for listening. Again, my name is Anjulia J. Gutierrez, and have a good day.